Hi, everyone. This is Michael Hoffman at C3 Communications, and thank you for joining us for our webinar today, the RFP Dating Game. I wish I remembered the music from this show, and I would be playing it. So today we're going to be doing a webinar about RFPs and all of the pitfalls and positives, negatives, and alternatives to the RFP dating game. And for us, this is an issue that comes up all the time, and that's because we do respond to RFPs at C3, and we turn down a lot of RFPs at C3, and we see a lot of we see some very well done RFPs, and we see large numbers of poorly crafted RFPs that are designed, it seems, to just waste a lot of people's time. And so that's always frustrating from our side. But I think we also see that the best results don't always come from those same processes. So this is something that that's been on our mind. We on some of the lists and groups that we're involved in, the Progressive Exchange and others, we've seen a lot of discussion about this issue, and we wanted to take some of what other people have said about this and some of our own thoughts and put it together, and hopefully give you a set of checklists and to-dos and ideas and thoughts on how you can approach this in a way that will lead to the best results. And the best results is some combination of getting what you need at the right cost, but really the right partner and the right solution for you. So with that in mind, I'd like to just say that our presenter today for most of this is going to be Mark Ross. Mark will introduce himself in a minute, but Mark is our Director of Web Services at C3 and someone who has experience at a lot of different levels in working with both on the client side and on the vendor side. Mark has been at very large companies, has been at startups, been at working in for-profit, nonprofit world, and really has a lot of experience about this. We're also joined by Bridget Colling. Bridget is our Director of Content Marketing at C3, and she'll be looking at your questions and things. If you have any comments, questions, technical problems, you can put them in the chat window and go to meeting. And you can also use Twitter and just use the hashtag RFP Dating Game. We'd love to hear your RFP positives, your RFP horror stories, but also any questions. Bridget will be monitoring Twitter during our conversation. So with that in mind, I'd like to start with just a little bit of a background. We'd love to know some things about you that'll help inform us here. So so we have a little instant poll. Our first question here is, how do you find your best vendor partners? So we're going to do a little instant poll, and that should show up for you here. So you can select one of the following. So are they existing vendors and partners? Were they referred by someone? Were they from an open RFP or an RFI, a request for information, and then an RFP to select? And maybe none of the above, but pick one, and we will see share our results. Okay, so we're going to close that process, and then we have a second question, and we'll give you the results in a second. The second question is just to understand who on this call is in the midst of this right now. So are you planning on hiring a new vendor in the next few months? Is that why you're here? So let's have that poll, and then we'll share the results. Okay, it looks like about 70% of you are in the midst of this now and looking to hire. And it looks like in terms of where you found vendors before, about 42% said referrals. Excuse me, 29% said it was existing vendors, and that's interesting. I mean, we also see a lot of success around referrals. So with this, and we'll in the blog post when we post the slides here to the C3 blog and SlideShare, we'll add the poll results in the text there as well. So let's move on. So I want to just turn it over to Mark, and Mark can jump in and talk about why we're calling this the RFP dating game, and thinking about what type you are and what type you're looking for.
Hi, thank you, Michael. Welcome, everyone. Definitely excited to have this discussion today, and as we suggested earlier, and we will reiterate again at the end, we really do see this as an ongoing conversation that's been taking place and certainly isn't going to end today, but we would like to really add something and contribute to the conversation. So one of the ways that we find it helpful to talk about this is in thinking about it as a dating game. And when we say the dating game, we don't necessarily mean the talk show, but we sort of mean the game of dating, finding a relationship, matchmaking, because it is so much of, in our point of view, based on relationship type things. So we have, for the purposes of today's talk, created two extremes that we're hoping will help represent a spectrum. On the left, we're using the hot mobile app Tinder, which, if you're not familiar with, is basically people finding hookups based on geography and pictures. It's like Hot or Not for the mobile age. You know, these are the type who want more of a meat market. And on the right, we've got the relationship seeker, which on that extreme is much more of someone who's looking for an exchange of ideas, enjoys talking. We've got eHarmony as the dating profile here. So, you know, we're clearly digital because we're all using online dating, but these are our extremes here today. So we'd like to break it down a little bit more, and I think the way we see the hookup is someone who really knows exactly what they're looking for. You don't want a lot of talk. You're very confident and experienced with the nature of the work to be performed. And the provider that you're looking for may just be more of a commodity to you, and it's not necessary that it's a long-term relationship. So scenarios that this fit in, you know, are subcontracting, freelancers, temp agencies, some of these matchmaking sites, things that allow you as an expert to know what you want, and certainly, you know, as you go through an RFP process or one of the other types of ways to find help, you're very clear and focused. Again, on the other end of the spectrum is where we're defining the relationship. Now, this is when you're actually looking for someone to lead and advise you on your journey. You're not just looking for someone who's subservient to just dig a ditch and move on. You hopefully know what your type is in terms of a good match. You're just not necessarily sure where to find them. You don't already know them. And you're seeking probably a long-term project partner, and ideally a good outcome is going to be determined more by the working relationship and their capabilities than price and time. Now again, we're framing this as a spectrum. All projects won't fit into the same, and all organizations aren't going to be the same. The idea is that different timing may be appropriate for different things, and what we want to try to emphasize as we go into the alphabet soup of possibilities is, you know, be selective and thoughtful about how you approach finding a new partner. So let's talk about some of the options. Now, we see an amazing lack of standards within organizations, across organizations. We see an absence of selection criteria that you're going to use to measure participants, and we find that there's often even a lack of basic terminology where things get confused. Now, in the nonprofit world, what we've found is that the RFP in and of itself seems to have taken on a larger-than-life role, and it's sort of this one-size-fits-all approach. But given that it's also not necessarily followed with best practices, and so therefore if it's handled poorly by an organization seeking help, you're just less likely to find a really good match because the potential partners see that as a signal in the game that you don't really know what you're doing, and why would they want to work with someone who doesn't seem to have their act together? Again, much like if you're dating in a singles bar and somebody is, you know, dirty, smelly, dressed poorly, tripping all over themselves, or you know, can't stand up at the bar, you know, that doesn't make them a very attractive potential partner. All right, so let's talk about some of the things here on the screen. We've tried to organize them thanks to Kelly Project Solutions image credit here. What's commercially attractive when you have definable requirements? Is it competitive among suppliers? You know, are there opportunities for saving, and what's the risk? So a reverse auction, that's, you know, if you think about an auction, which is typically a place where you have a lot of buyers in a room shouting for the one seller, right? eBay, Christie's auction on fine paintings, buyers keep raising their price to win the game. A reverse auction is where you have one buyer, many sellers, and you're lowering the price to win the game. A sealed bid, which is the next one over, is typically found more in a government contract, but some organizations do use this when you have very clear requirements and it's accurate and complete. It's typically a one-round process. The vendors get one shot, and each sealed bid is often opened in public and at a specific date and time. So it's sort of this like public process where everyone can see what the submissions were, but no one's allowed to change anything after the fact. So then a contract is awarded based on the lowest bid that met requirements. Now an RFI, which is one of our favorite tools, and we certainly are going to try and encourage more of this today and ongoing, it also can be known as an invitation to bid. The idea here is that you're requesting a document from potential matches that focus on their capabilities, awards, skills, experience, things that help them stand out. They're not expected to provide fees and specifics, and it helps both parties filter out bad matches without too much investment of time on either side. Now, it's also really helpful for you as an organization because it can be a learning opportunity in that it doesn't require full details and documentation. You might not be sure of the solution you want. You may not be ready, but you do want to start meeting people and finding potential partners. So again, this can be really helpful too if you need to hire a strategy or a consulting team to help you clarify what it is you want for an RFP. You may find them through an RFI process. An RFI is typically pushed out to a very large audience and then followed up with an RFP, which is our next one to talk about, which would be to a much smaller audience. So one of the pitfalls that we see all the time is an RFP is put out to a very broad audience, and therefore you're expecting busy professionals to drop everything they're doing and respond to this very detailed proposal when neither they nor you really know if it's going to be a good match yet. So a request for a proposal, though, is very detailed, is very specific. And again, one of the problems we see is that very often they're not in what we see sent out. So that really would be better as an RFI, and don't call it an RFP. You know, you are giving an opportunity in the process to have a couple stages. You generally want to let the matches, the vendors ask questions and to clarify early on in the process. Then they can submit their proposals. You may then filter it down to a smaller group of finalists where you would then have like a presentation, maybe face-to-face meetings, more conversation. And ideally, the RFP is a reasonably small and selective group of prospects and not a feeding frenzy to the masses as an open RFP might be. So it's a great next step after an RFI when you have some options. And then the next one we'll talk about is actually an RFQ, which if the RFP process gets you down to 2 finalists or 3 finalists, but you just can't pick because everybody seems great and you really do want to compete on price now, you can then ask for a request for quote because you're familiar with the vendors and they can now update their price and time and delivery schedule with that known among them. Now, if that doesn't all make your head spin, the RFQ is also known as a request for qualification, and there may be some of you in the audience who are thinking, hey, that's not a quote, it's a qualification, which ironically is used when price is not an important criteria. So again, it just kind of goes to show that even among the experts, there's certainly a lot of confusion in different ways to play it. So we want to revisit our types. The hookup here is the type who is very clear on what they want. You can describe it. You know how you want to get it done, and you prefer a very transactional process of matchmaking. You want to jump right in. It's about data points and criteria weighting, time, price, overall qualifications. Jump right in. You're the hookup. Go find your meat market. In fact, we've seen with the evolution of internet technology and online communities, there's new marketplaces that provide that meat market aspect for you. So go for it. Now, for today, we would like to dive a lot deeper into the relationship seeker as opposed to the hookup, because we feel this type happens much more often in the nonprofit community in particular. And we, as well as many of the other folks' experience that we've heard and read about, really feel that this brings the best results. So a long-term relationship requires deliberate research and a process that takes time and thought. Think of it more of an employee interview process that's educational, and it might help you clarify what you're after, as opposed to just, I got a job, I need to get it done. So what we really feel is key here is that the amount of forethought and effort that you can put into the process up front and at the beginning is just have magnification upon magnification in the way it's going to affect the quality of the process and the ease of the process for you. And most importantly, it's going to impact your final product. So if you think about the way incentives are structured, if you do an open RFP and you're just going to make a decision after getting 50 proposals, first of all, your decision-making team is going to, your eyes are going to glaze over after the first 10 anyway. You're going to lose track of them. It becomes an overwhelming process for your team to wade through all of that information and filter. And then what kind of firms are likely to win a game like that where they're probably competing on price or something? So what you're tending to get are, folks who are able to have a sales machine that just cranks out proposals, which isn't always the boutique firm or the small shop of, specialists. And sometimes you want that. So get your house in order, know yourself really well, so that you can find a great match because you know what you're up to. Know what tools you may want to use at this place and time. Don't just replicate exactly what's been done before, and don't just copy what you think someone else did somewhere. Most importantly, get as clear as possible on what it is you want done or need done and what your goals and objectives are. What does success look like? Now, we prepared a checklist for you to help in this process, give you a little sense of the overview of what we're going to talk about next. Things like getting your organization organized. That should be your first step. Starting to get a sense of what you're about, what makes a good match. Defining the qualities, doing some research. There's lots of ways to do research and find potential matches, or to learn more about the nature of the work that you need to get done. For example, if you need to do a website design or you want to do a social media strategy and you've never done that before, it's probably going to be a good idea for you to go learn a little bit more about that work and not get lost in trying to find a potential partner for something you really don't even know anything about. Because again, it's going to kind of come through to them that you don't necessarily know what you're talking about. So define what success looks like. If you're unclear, we highly recommend you go get help. And then we recommend you do an RFI. Go for it. And start circulating the ideas, find that ideal match, and get out there. Okay. So the first step is getting your organization organized. We've got sorry, I had a little technical difficulties there. We've got a great quote from Shakespeare about "To thine own self be true." So start with your organization, your team. Do you know all the people in your organization who need to be involved in this decision, who are going to be users of the product or service or beneficiaries? Who's got stake in the matter? We call them stakeholders, right? Do you have internal buy-in from those key stakeholders in management so that you know who needs to be involved, who's making the final decision? Create criteria for making that decision. That'll help you get clear as a team, make sure that everyone's on the same page. Create a process and a timeline. Make that public within your team of stakeholders so that there's no mystery around it. Ideally, you're going to designate a point person for all outside communication. And again, as we mentioned, it's really critical you define goals and objectives for your organization. Why are you doing this? Have it written down and have it be something that can be agreed upon. If you know the why behind a project, it's going to be a lot easier to find someone who's going to tell you how or what. And if you don't know the why and you can't communicate that to potential partners, it's going to make it very challenging for them to come up with perfect solutions and be a good match. So what is it that makes a great partner for your organization in general? Do you have a type? Ask yourself, what are your best relationships like? What type of firm really fits well with your organization's culture? Are you guys fast-paced, small, entrepreneurial, get things done, prone to action? Or are you a larger, more bureaucratic, process-driven, organization who takes time and there's going to be a lot of steps in the process? So we've created a checklist here that can help get you started, stimulate some conversations internally. What's an ideal match? Get you thinking. Again, do you find your best matches are large firms that have deep benches and lots of capability, or do you like smaller firms? Do you care how long they've been in business? Some folks, that's a big indicator of trust and reliability. Do you get to know who the people are who are going to be on your project versus executive team bios, right? Especially in the day of the internet, it's really easy to set up a web page with one person's picture on it and call yourself a company. Is project management important to you? How many projects does this firm typically handle? How do you fit in? Are you a big fish or a small fish to them? Are you the biggest client they've ever handled? In which case you need to be concerned that maybe they're overreaching. And if you're the small project, then maybe you're not going to be really worth their time, and potentially you're going to fall to the bottom of the priority list when you need to get stuff done. So a lot of those questions can help you figure out these things. And these questions will help you directly influence what information you would request in the first step when you go to meet new matches. Something like an RFI. Now we want to pause here for a second and just say, if you don't know what you're doing, get help. It's okay. Find a consultant. Get someone internally to help you get organized and get clear. Think of it like a matchmaking service, or if you're going to go out dating, if you've been married for 20 years and now you're divorced and you're going back into the scene for the first time, you might want to get someone to give you some coaching. You might want to get a wardrobe consultant, get a makeover. These are normal things. They apply to this business as well. So best opportunities for us have always come from previous clients who let us do consulting for them. And what we're seeing is many successful organizations are hiring a firm to provide consulting services around strategy and to provide the framework that then becomes the basis of the RFP or the request for quote or whatever the end tool is, because they weren't exactly sure what it is they need. They just know they need something. Or again, when you get to the question of why as opposed to how, they know they have a problem. They just don't know the best way to solve it. And so hiring consultants to help you with that strategy and the framework around that can really make a big difference. You can also hire a firm to manage the whole process for you. And if you're a large organization in governments, they have software for this. They call them procurement services. There's a very elaborate game here and marketplace around assisting organizations with finding good partners in matchmaking. So we want to get into the next steps for you, which is getting out there and really finding stuff, finding good people. So keep in mind that there is a science to the way in which people build trust. This applies to organizations as well. And the truth is, your organization is just a bundle of people. And if someone in your team doesn't trust your partner, there's going to be problems throughout the project. There needs to be give and take, and there needs to be trust both ways. This is something you need to have time in your process in order to get to know the people and find compatibility and create opportunities to build trust over time to make that a good, strong relationship and help give you a sense of who is going to be your best partner. So we have some questions here that you might want to think about. So it's kind of like another checklist. Are they professional or casual in their communications? Do they say what they're going to do when they say they're going to do it? Hey, I'll get that to you Friday by 5 p.m. Did it show up? You know, when you pick up the phone, do they answer? You know, do they respond promptly to emails? Are you talking to the person who's going to do the project, or is this a salesperson who doesn't actually do any work? Or is it an executive who hasn't gotten their hands dirty in a long time? Do they have references that you can speak to? Have you heard about them before? Do they present at conferences? Do they have a good blog? Do you like, you know, their social media presence and find that you connect with the kinds of things that they do? You know, try not to get caught up in the shiny object syndrome, which is, well, you know, they've made an awesome logo for that other organization, or I love that website that they did for such and such. You know, you need to know if it's going to be an apples to apples comparison. Did the other organization have 2 people on staff or 20? Did they have 5 months and $5 million, or, you know, $50 and 5 days? How are you going to compare to that? Just because they delivered something that looks shiny to another organization doesn't mean that's going to be the same parameters for you. So we've put a couple examples together to try to bring this together for you. So in our first example, what we're really looking at is a client of ours that we had done a couple projects with, and over time built some trust, got to know them, and they were then looking to do an RFP for communication strategy. So we've been working with them on websites, and we've done some videos, and so we really understand the client's needs, and we understand some of the big challenges that they're dealing with operationally. So we work with them on a strategic level to define what that communication strategy process should look like and what the final RFP will be. And that gives them a much clearer way to go to the market, find a good match. In our other example, one of our favorite projects is Eli Talks, which you may or may not know about. Similarly, our client knew us from working on the web, video, and strategy in the past. They knew that we had the skills to get the job done, but typically we had been executing what had already been decided. And then by building that relationship and delivering over time, we started to work with them more on the strategy of the why and how up front. And then we're able to actually help them create a whole new thing that had never existed before by working collaboratively and truly as partners because we were working together from the start. So that's a lot of information coming at you. We are going to go to an opportunity for questions in just a second. You know, I really just want to kind of conclude a little bit by saying, you know, don't leave it to chance, as the slide indicates. Be thoughtful. We hope these checklists can give you some starting points internally to get yourself organized, or to use the next time you go and maybe you have the knee-jerk reaction to just dump an RFP out on the web publicly, to think through it a little bit more, or to help guide you in relationship seeking. And if you do enough relationship seeking, you know, what we consider business development, over time, you may never need to go to an RFP because you're going to know a bunch of good firms who can deliver on your marketing or your video or your website or your technology provider, whatever it is that you may need, you can make that work.
Thanks, Mark. That was terrific. This is Michael Hoffman again, and so, you know, one of the things we do at C3 is help organizations around these objectives, and certainly we'd be happy to talk to you. So Mark's email is right there on the screen if you want to contact him. I'm Michael at c3.com. if you want to contact me. And I was thinking about this, as Mark was talking from the vendor side. There are complaints that vendors see all the time. If you're not familiar with those, you should check out what's been at the hashtag RFP Dating Game on Twitter, and also you could Google something like the RFP Drinking Game, which was a hilarious look at typical things that happen in RFPs. I think from the vendor perspective, when you have an open RFP and you just send it out to everyone and on every list, the best vendors are not going to respond generally, because they don't want to be in that kind of beauty contest. They have no idea whether the fix is already in, which is the other big complaint from the vendor side, that you already really know who you really want to work with, but you need to do an RFP because it's some kind of rule somewhere. And so that's why, as Mark talked about the RFI, the let's qualify some firms first and then decide to have a small group. And most of us in this world are happy to be in a competitive process as long as we know it's open and transparent and fair. So, that's really from our side. So if you have questions, you can type them in the chat window or put them in Twitter. And we really appreciate your participation today, and certainly hope that you'll join us for other C3 webinars, and you can join us on Twitter at C3, Facebook as well. So we have a question here from Alicia. We already have our RFP out and already overwhelmed with responses and questions. Any suggestions on managing this now? So Mark, I'll let you tackle
that. Thanks. You're going to need to go into triage mode, and I think that might be obvious, but this is again where having that organizational criteria is really key, and understanding the weight of certain things. So if you're overwhelmed with responses, you're going to need to eliminate a number of folks really quickly in order to filter it down to something that is more manageable. And you may want to keep track of the questions, but again, I think that's a lot why we wanted to recommend, sort of a softer, gentler approach, is so that you could avoid that, and that, you get that kind of a response more of in the RFI, where it's not a lot to read, it's 1 or 2 pages, and, it feels more like window shopping than what you're in, which is, price comparison on very detailed product. But I think you're going to need an internal process with some specific early criteria to try to just thin the pool down. Keep track of those questions, put them all into one document, answer them, share the questions and answers from all vendors with all vendors, again, to keep the playing field equal.
That's great. Thanks, Mark. There's a question from Bill about how do you convince senior staff in a nonprofit that cost is not the most important element to an RFP response? I think one of the obvious answers to that is if you do the qualifications step first, then price isn't the issue. It's really who's the best for the project. And then price can be much more of an issue in later phases. That's one response. Do you have another one to that question about talking to leadership around what's really important when you get RFP responses? Mark?
Oh boy, that's a good one. Yeah, that is a good one. I think you may want to use an example that we've heard, and I find even when we're hiring subcontractors, because a lot of times you'll hear, well, I don't want to spend more than $100 an hour, and these guys are 150. And you say, well, if I pay 50 bucks an hour to this guy and you think that's cheaper, but it takes him 6 hours to do the same work and get it right as this other team who's 150 bucks an hour, that is not equal. Like, we would have made a better decision by choosing the higher cost and getting it done on time and done right. And so I think that's one of the things that you really need to consider. And when you talk with senior staff around cost, emphasize that there need to be multiple criteria, and one of those should be something about proven ability to deliver on time and some feedback from those references, so that you're not just getting someone who's giving you a really low quote to win your business, and then they're going to screw it up, or in the middle of the project start telling you that's out of scope, that's out of scope, that's out of scope, and by the time you're done with the project, you're way higher than the other bids you turned down who were being honest with you up front.
Yeah, we see that a lot, and that is definitely one of those frustrating things where we look at the price and we say, well, there's just no way that this is going to happen in this price, and we have a policy that we're going to tell it like it is, and often it means that they're going to choose that lower price thing, and then invariably, whatever months later, we hear that, oh, it actually didn't quite work out that way. So those are really easy stories to find, and I think that is a cautionary tale to have some of those stories, certainly a cautionary tale about that. So we have some more questions around from Susan. We have a question. Susan says she used an RFP, selected a firm, they built a website with a proprietary CMS that didn't meet their needs, and now they need to redo things, and they need advice on what to look for in solution providers. So how do I find a firm to give me that type of advice?
Well, since you're specifically looking at a content management system to run the back end of your website, and that's what you're looking is to redesign the website, I think there are specific things that you can look for, and this may be a good process for some strategy consulting, short-term engagement with someone, a firm or an individual, to come in and help you look at what that proprietary CMS didn't do. Did your needs change? Are you clear on the things that would make you happy if you had a new one? And then start to look for firms that can deliver those types of solutions. But you may want to keep the recommendations of which CMS to use separate from the proposal. So if you knew what CMS was going to meet your needs based on a consultant, it'd be much easier to go shopping for someone who can build a good website, do a nice design, and implement that particular solution. Then, if you get 5 proposals and all 5 of them are using different software, you may not be as familiar with the total cost of ownership of each of those platforms. And when I say total cost of ownership, I'm referring to the fact that sometimes there's license fees. It might be a lot harder to find a hosting company or more expensive hosting company for some. There's all kinds of hidden costs sometimes that can be in there, and you're going to want to make sure you really understand everything. So sometimes that's better done with a consultant you can really trust and who's interior to your team before you go out as an RFP.
So Susan asked about how to find those kinds of consultants. So Susan, one way would be to post something to a list asking for people who would do that. Often, like at C3, the firms that build websites are also firms that do that kind of consulting as well. And sometimes that is projects that lead into the work, and sometimes that's projects that are independent of whatever work that would come subsequent to it. So that's one way that you can look at it. We have a question from Christy, who says that they drafted their RFP for complete website design and responsive design, and their old site is built on Joomla, and they're open to using a different CMS like WordPress or Drupal or a new version of Joomla, but they don't know if it's a good idea to have vendors suggest a solution that's right for them, because they think the vendors will just suggest the ones that they work on or that they like best. And I think the answer to that, Mark in his previous answer just answered that to some extent, which is if you have specific needs around the CMS, it may be best to separate that decision from the vendor decision. So it's starting with, what's the right CMS, and that's a project, and then it's, okay, who are the right vendors there? I think in sometimes something like WordPress or Joomla or Drupal, there's a lot of overlap in functionality, and the truth is that the one that the vendor is best at might be the right way to choose, in the sense that all of those platforms can do pretty much all of the same things for the most part. and people have kind of religious views about one or the other. But having a vendor that can deliver the kinds of things that you need in that, and having that trusted relationship at the right price with the right results is just as important as which one that you choose. So you're really, I think, looking at both of those things, the right fit for the right vendor, but also the right fit for you. The
only thing I would add to that one, just you know, to reemphasize that, you know, a lot of these backend tools, WordPress, Drupal, whatever, are all very similar in so many ways that as long as you're really clear what you need out of it, how it needs to work for you, and those technical requirements and functional business requirements, then it's going to be a lot easier to filter out if someone's proposing something that actually fits your need, or it is just what they know best. And you know, it's definitely helpful to go with a firm who's used the software before. It doesn't mean you can't learn it as you go. It's just a little bit bigger learning curve. There's a little more project management that's involved if you're learning a new tool. That should never be used as a reason to exclude someone, especially if it's a website design and you've got design, usability, content, and so many other factors involved.
So we have a question from Bill about wording and questions to understand ongoing costs after launch of a project or website. So not just hourly costs, but how many hours and what's needed. I think that's a great question from Bill, because one of the things that we're seeing shift is that the old model of you build a website and it's done and then you come back to it, you know, 3 years later to do it again, is slowly fading into a new model, which is about constant improvement, optimization and tweaking, and having a vendor relationship that carries through to that, we think, has become much more important. And that thinking about your budget as a way over a longer period of time, and not just the budget for the build, becomes much more important. So in terms of how to build that into your request, I think first of all is being serious about that request. What do you vendors think is the right approach to a relationship ongoing, and what maintenance do you think that we need? Is an approach to that. Another approach would be in the RFP development process to really think through about what kind of optimizing and tweaking and support have you needed in the past. So what do you know you need, and what would you like to be doing? What are all the things that you wish you could be doing to an existing website that you haven't had the vendor relationship or the budget to do? And so understanding that. So that goes back to what Mark talked about, the knowing yourself and knowing what your needs are. Mark, do you have any other thought around that?
Yeah, I think I had this recently, and we're often adding this into our own proposals. You know, wording and questions would be to specifically ask about, you know, does this price include hosting? Sometimes the vendor may include that as an assumption or sort of a side note or an asterisk somewhere. You're going to want to know that. You're going to want to know either as a part of your functionality request up front that you have total ability to change things, or that might be a good question for clarifying, which is, you know, imagining the typical maintenance that you may need to go through, you know, especially if you're doing a website. You know, you're going to want to update your homepage. You're going to want to change text. You're going to want to add new pages. You're going to want to move things in your footer. I mean, God knows a new social media network is invented every day. So, you know, you build it and you think all you need is Facebook, and then the next thing you know, you need 3 more share buttons on every page. So you're going to want to make sure you get a sense of that. And as Michael alluded to, because the world is much more iterative, and certainly we recommend ongoing optimization, both from a search engine point as well as conversions if you're into fundraising or driving a lot of action and activism, you're going to want to know, you know, what would it cost to maintain on a monthly basis, and what services will you provide in order to help me maintain it? A lot of folks like to build tools and they don't want to have anything to do with maintaining and servicing them. And then there's other shops, and we're included, that are more like the car dealership. We want to, you know, custom design something or sell you something off the shelf, but we also want you to come in and get maintenance and tune-ups and stay in contact and keep you on the road. So there's a number of different ways to do that, but definitely talk about 12-month cost projections or 18-month cost projections, and make sure you really think through all the hourly costs and monthly costs that may be not included in the build that you're getting.
Great, thanks, Mark. So we have one question from Steve about what are good places to discover potential vendors to invite to take part in an RFI. That's also a good question. I think there are lots of vendors out there. The two places that we see a lot of great vendors participating. One is N10. So if you're not familiar with the Nonprofit Technology Network, that is a great organization. They have an email list where you could post that you're looking for vendors in this area, and you will get plenty of responses to it. Also, there's a community on a list called the Progressive Exchange, which also someone on that list created a wiki, and we'll find the link to that and we'll put it in the materials that we'll post from this webinar. But there's a wiki, and the wiki is full of different vendors who focus on the nonprofit community in different areas. So, from web building or app building or video or digital strategy or whatever it is. And so it's something where vendors have filled it out themselves, and it's a pretty significant list. So just those two places would give you, a really large community to start looking from. Great. So I think that we don't have more questions. So I want to wrap up then. Thank you all so much for participating today. Again, you can email Mark directly at mross@c3.com, or me, I'm just Michael at c3.com. Find us on Twitter, find us on Facebook. And we also have an email list if you want to sign up for the C3 email. We send out things like tips and tricks about issues just like this on a regular basis, not too often. Our goal really is to lift all the boats and really help nonprofit organizations be effective in this new world of digital communications. So I want to again thank Mark for a great presentation. Thank you, Bridget, for being behind the scenes. And we will send you all an email when this slide deck and webinar are available online. Thank you very much, and have a great day.